All right, so today we're really going to get our hands dirty, metaphorically, of course,
Okay.
and take a look at what's going on under the hood with large language models, LLMs, as the cool kids are calling them these days.
Right, right.
These things that power all kinds of stuff, chatbots,
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah.
And we've got a real interesting study here that suggests the way that these AI understand language might be a little more complicated than we originally thought.
Oh, yeah. It's much more interesting than just a simple smooth model.
Yeah. Yeah. So get ready, folks, because we're about to go on a deep dive exploring
Yeah.
the bumpy landscape of how these AI understand language.
Okay, so the paper we're looking at today is called Token Embeddings Violate the Manifold Hypothesis by Michael Robinson, Surya Day, and Tony Chang.
Well,
And the important thing about this paper is that it really challenges a fundamental assumption about how these LLMs organize and relate words and concepts internally.
okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. So when you type a word into an LLM,
Yeah.
it doesn't just see it as, a bunch of letters.
No, no.
Transforms that word, or even just part of a word, which we call a token,
Right.
into a string of numbers, a vector.
Exactly.
Now, these vectors all exist in a high-dimensional space, and we're talking lots of dimensions here,
Lots of dimension.
and how these vectors are all clustered in their relationship to each other in that space.
Yeah.
That's how the AI understands how these words relate to one another.
That's its view of how language works.
Yeah, it's like its dictionary and thesaurus all rolled into this crazy multidimensional map.
Exactly. Yeah.
So for a long time, the idea was that this token space, this high-dimensional token space,
Right.
was structured according to something called the manifold hypothesis.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, you can think of a manifold as like a smooth, continuous surface.
Okay.
And it's embedded in this high-dimensional space.
Right.
And the idea was that all these word vectors were arranged nicely on or very near to this smooth surface.
So why did scientists think that?
Well, a smooth manifold would suggest that there's like an elegance
Okay.
and consistency to how LLMs understand language.
Right. So it just made sense that it would be kind of organized and predictable.
Right, words with similar meaning should be close together on this manifold.
Okay.
And it would kind of make the relationships between them very predictable and easy to model.
So it would make sense that the AI is figuring out language in this, organized way.
Right.
Okay. So then we get to this paper, Token Embeddings Violate the Manifold Hypothesis.
Right.
What are they saying?
So their main finding is that the token embeddings
Okay.
of several really common open source LLMs, things like GPT-2, Lemma 7b, Mistral 7b, and Pythia 6.9b,
right.
they don't actually lie on this smooth manifold. They found evidence of a much more complex
Yeah.
and kind of uneven structure.
So it's not that nice, smooth, predictable surface.
It's not as neat and tidy as we thought.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So then they talk about these things called singularities.
Right.
That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, so imagine, like, you have a smooth sheet,
All right.
and then there's like a wrinkle in it,
Okay.
or a tear, or maybe it folds back on itself in some weird way.
Right, I'm picturing it, yeah.
Yeah, so in the LLM token space,
Uh-huh.
certain tokens have these dramatically different neighborhoods compared to the tokens around them.
Okay, so it's like they're in a zone where the normal rules don't really apply.
Exactly.
Okay, so what's the connection to, like how we actually use language?
Right, so the researchers suggest these singularities might be linked to things like polysemy,
Polysemy.
where one word has multiple meanings,
Okay.
like bright meaning intelligent or shiny,
Right.
or homonyms where words sound the same but have different meanings, like two, and two.
Okay, so because they have these different meanings, they might end up in these kind of weird singularity zones in the token space.
Exactly, because they have multiple distinct semantic neighborhoods.
Oh, okay, that's starting to make sense.
Yeah.
So if the AI's internal language map is full of these singularities, like what does that mean for how it works in practice?
Well, the paper suggests that if you give an LLM a prompt
Okay.
that contains a token near a singularity,
Uh-huh.
it could lead to more unpredictable or variable output
Okay.
than a similar prompt that uses a token in a smoother region.
So it's like it's navigating a more chaotic landscape
Mm.
around these singular points.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So think about those times you've seen an LLM give a weird answer
Yeah.
to a question that seemed straightforward.
Yeah, and you're like, why? What just happened?
Right. This research suggests that those inconsistencies
Mhm.
might be linked to these singularities.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection here.
Yeah.
So they also talk about this thing called the fiber bundle hypothesis.
Right.
What is that all about?
It's kind of like a more flexible way of thinking about the structure of the token space. So instead of one smooth manifold, it proposes that there might be a local split into different types of dimensions around each token.
Okay, so it's not just one big smooth surface, it's more complex.
Yeah, so imagine for each word, there's a primary direction representing the core meaning of that word.
Okay.
We'll call that signal.
Signal.
And then there are other dimensions that represent different nuances or different contexts the word can appear in, which we'll call noise.
Noise, okay.
So a fiber bundle allows for this kind of separation.
Okay.
Whereas a simple manifold doesn't.
So it's like saying that around each word, there's a main direction for its meaning, but then there's a little bit of wiggle room for all the different ways you can actually use that word.
Exactly, yeah.
So how did they test if these LLMs actually fit this fiber bundle structure?
So they created this statistical test called the fiber bundle null.
The fiber bundle null?
Yeah, and the idea is to see if the local structure around a token is consistent with this idea of separate signal and noise dimensions.
All right, so they're trying to poke at this language map inside the LLM and see how it reacts.
Exactly.
So the map was smooth. They'd expect things to change gradually if they looked at different words.
Yeah.
But what do they find?
So if they reject this fiber bundle null for a token, it means the structure around that token doesn't fit the fiber bundle model.
Got it.
Which, again, points to these singularities, these interesting points.
So they're finding these sudden shifts that suggest these wrinkles in the map.
Exactly.
Okay, so what were the results when they tested these 4 different LLMs?
Okay, so across all 4 models, GPT-2, Lemma 7b, Mistral 7b, and Pythia 6.9b, they found lots of instances where they rejected this fiber bundle null, meaning that even this more flexible model doesn't really capture what's going on.
So it's not just a smooth manifold. And it's not even a fiber bundle.
Not even a fiber bundle, yeah.
So what they thought was going on is probably not really how it works.
It suggests that the token space is even more complex than that.
Okay, wow, that's a pretty huge finding.
Yeah, it is.
So were there any differences between these 4 LLMs in terms of which tokens were these singular ones?
Yeah, so that's what makes this even more interesting.
Okay.
So Lemma 7b and Mistral 7b, they actually use the exact same set of tokens in their vocabulary.
Okay.
But the study found different sets of singular tokens in each model.
So even though they have the same words, the way they understand them and organize them is different.
Right, which suggests that the training process really impacts the structure of the token space.
So how you train the model changes how it understands the relationship between words.
Yeah, it's not just the words it knows.
Okay.
It's how it internally organizes those words.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, in the paper, they have this figure 2, which looks at the distribution of dimensions in GPT-2.
Right.
What did that show us?
So, figure 2 shows that the number of what you might call synonyms or interchangeable contexts for a token, it's not a smooth, even distribution. It's got these peaks and valleys.
So some words have tons of synonyms and related words, and some have very few.
Exactly. Yeah. And if the token space was a simple manifold, you'd expect it to be more evenly spread out. But the fact that it's not suggests that the structure is more complex.
Okay, so back to this fiber bundle idea.
Yeah.
How does that help us understand this, this noise around different tokens?
Okay, so the fiber bundle hypothesis, it tries to account for this by suggesting that locally, around each token, there are separate dimensions for the core, meaning the signal, and for the variability or the different ways that token can be used, the noise. So the idea is that the amount of this noise isn't the same for all tokens.
Got it.
It depends on the token and its location.
Okay, so it's more specific to each word.
Right.
Okay.
And the paper actually has a theorem, Theorem 1, which formally defines the fiber bundle hypothesis, and it provides a way to test for it.
Okay, how do they test for it?
So they look at how the number of neighboring tokens changes as you increase the radius around a central token in the embedding space. And they plot this relationship on a log-log scale. And if it's a fiber bundle, the slopes should decrease as the radius increases. But if the slope increases at some point, it violates the hypothesis.
So it's all about how quickly you encounter new words as you move further away from the central word.
Exactly. Yeah, and figure 5 in the paper lays out the step-by-step process.
Okay, can you give us a quick rundown of that?
Sure. So they choose a central token.
Okay.
They calculate the distances to all other tokens.
Right.
They sort those distances. And then they look at how the number of neighbors changes as the radius increases.
Right, and they're looking for those places where the rate of change, the slope, goes up.
Exactly. That would be a sign of a singularity.
Okay.
And they actually show examples of this in Figure 6.
Yeah.
With tokens like the $ and the hashtag in GPT-2.
And what did those examples show?
So those specific tokens,
Yeah.
they didn't actually show strong violations of the fiber bundle hypothesis.
Okay.
But they did show how you could visually estimate these base and fiber dimensions from the slopes on the plot.
Got it.
But they also had an example with the cent symbol, where they did observe a slope increase, which would indicate a violation.
Right.
But it didn't quite meet their statistical significance threshold for the main result.
Right, so it was more of an illustration of the method.
Yeah. Exactly.
So they summarized all these findings in Table 1, which looked at how many tokens violated both the manifold and the fiber bundle hypotheses.
Yeah, and across all 4 LLMs, they found a significant number of tokens that violated both.
So this wasn't just a few random words, it was a widespread thing.
It was a pattern.
Okay.
And the table also estimated the base and fiber dimensions for each model. Which highlighted the structural differences.
Right, and how the training process affected things.
Yeah, and the fact that they saw rejections in both base and fiber dimensions supports their idea that these singularities are linked to polysemy.
Okay, so words with multiple core meanings.
Right.
Then in Table 2, they give specific examples of tokens that violate the fiber bundle hypothesis.
Yeah, for example, in GPT-2, they found Zan and Honor.
Van and Onder, interesting.
Yeah, and they even noted that Zan usually has to be at the beginning of a word.
Okay.
And for Mistral 7b, they found monitor, which also usually starts a word, and eng. And these are just examples, but it gives you a sense of the types of tokens that are often found in these singular regions.
So it's not random, there are patterns.
Exactly.
Okay, and they also talked about these broader trends, right?
Right. So they found that for GPT-2, a lot of the singular tokens tend to be the ones at the beginning of words.
Okay, so start of word tokens.
Yeah, and for Pythia 6.9b, they found a lot of word fragments.
Word fragments.
Or meaningless sequences.
Interesting.
And then for Lemma 7b and Mistral 7b, it was a mix of start-of-word tokens and word fragments.
So different models have different types of tokens in these singular regions.
Right, which suggests that the way the model breaks down words into tokens and the data it was trained on affects the structure of the token space.
Okay, so it's not just the words, it's all these other factors too.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about these TSNE visualizations, figures 7 through 10.
Okay.
So for people who aren't machine learning experts, what are these colorful plots showing us?
So these visualizations are trying to show us the structure of these high-dimensional token spaces by projecting them down into 2 dimensions. So we can actually see them, and they color the tokens based on their local dimensions. And what we see is these distinct regions and boundaries. For example, in Lemma 7b, Pythia 6.9b, and GPT-2, they found clusters of tokens with low local dimensions.
So these are words that don't have a lot of close neighbors in the token space.
Right, and they think these might represent polysemy.
Polysemy, okay.
Yeah, where words with multiple meanings are grouped together.
Okay, that's interesting.
And Pythia 6.9b, it had this weird pinch point.
A pinch point?
Yeah, made up of non-printing characters and white space.
Okay, what about Lemma 7b and Mistral 7b?
So even though they have the same tokens, their plots look different. They show these stratification boundaries.
Stratification boundaries?
Yeah, where there are sudden changes in the dimensions of the tokens.
So even though they have the same words, the way they're organized is different.
That's exactly.
And that's because of the training process.
Yeah, it really highlights that the training data and the specific algorithms used have a huge impact on the structure.
Okay, that makes sense.
GPT-2 also showed this large cluster of low-dimensional numeric and date-related tokens, which suggests that it might have trouble distinguishing between them.
Interesting.
And you could see some stratification in Mistral 7b's visualization,
okay,
but it wasn't as obvious in the others.
Okay, so what does all this mean for us?
Well, the main takeaway is that none of these LLMs have token spaces that are simple manifolds.
Okay.
And most aren't even fiber bundles.
So our understanding of how they organize language is probably wrong.
It's likely more complex than we initially thought.
Okay.
Yeah, the presence of these singularities
Yeah.
means that the relationship between semantic similarity and distance in the token space is more complex and potentially less stable.
So for our listeners who are trying to stay on top of this rapidly evolving field, why should they care about these mathematical concepts?
Well, this research helps us understand how LLMs work at a much deeper level. It's not just about what goes in and what comes out.
Right.
It's about how they represent language internally.
Okay.
And this can help us understand why they sometimes do weird things.
Yeah, like why they give unexpected responses.
Exactly. Those singularities we've been talking about, they might explain those unexpected behaviors.
So it's like these wrinkles in the map are causing the AI to take unexpected turns.
Right. Exactly.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
So for those who are maybe feeling overwhelmed by the technical details, what's the one thing they should take away from this?
The main takeaway is that the AI's language map isn't smooth and uniform. It's got hills, valleys, and maybe even some cliffs.
So it's not as straightforward as we might have thought.
Exactly.
And that affects how they understand language.
It does.
So here's a final thought for everyone.
Okay.
If these token spaces have all these complexities, could it be that those very singularities are what give LLMs their creativity?
Interesting question.
You know, could those be the areas where the model is able to think outside the box?
Yeah, maybe they allow the model to interpret things in unexpected ways.
Right, and that might be where we get those really insightful or even strange responses.
It makes you wonder if a perfectly smooth token space would actually be less creative.
Yeah, would it be as interesting?
Something to think about.
Yeah. So for those of you who want to dive deeper, the paper is called Token Embeddings Violate the Manifold Hypothesis.
Right.
And you can find lots of other interesting research.
Definitely.
On the geometry of language models.
It's a fascinating area.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
See you next time.